Chapter 18, Before the Storm. German socialists call peace demonstration. French workmen plan general strike to prevent war. Keir Hardie protests against war in Britain. The world is waiting to hear from the socialists. Hilda went to bed with a copy of the Socialist Call. It was hard to fall asleep at such decisive moments. The impending war in Europe was a personal matter with her. The strength, the honor of the proletariat, of the working classes everywhere was involved. The world was waiting to hear from the socialists. It would hear, the socialist paper thundered on its editorial page. Capitalism has challenged the proletariat of the world, and the proletariat of the world would answer the challenge. The forces of labor will kill the god of war forever. The forces of labor will kill the god of war forever. Hilda was trembling with anticipation. She fell asleep with the threat on her lips. In the morning, the Times had a different story to tell. Germany declares martial law. Anti-war demonstrations prohibited in Austria. Jean Jaurès, France's leading socialist, shot. Russian armies on foot. As a willow before the storm, the proletariat of the world was bending its head before the god of war. The socialist organs were apologetic. They were making explanations. The militarist cliques everywhere were too well organized for the coup. They had forced the war upon their peoples by a surprise action before the working masses everywhere could countermand their sinister plans. The press, opposed to the socialists, on the other hand, was making spirited deductions. It spoke of the death of the socialist movement everywhere. The war had killed international socialism. The more virulent of the anti-socialist papers were writing its obituary. International socialism had never been more than a dream. The socialists and pacifists were visionaries. They did not know human nature. They were ignoring the slow progress of the race. The world was not yet ripe for universal peace. Hilda read these editorials in the capitalist press with compressed lips. As the war had become a personal grief to her, so this was a personal humiliation. It was an insult hurled at herself. She was jeered at along with the other socialists. There were months of such invective in the newspapers. Then came good times. A tide of prosperity was rolling over the country. The cry of death in Europe was drowned by the voice of affluence at home. Factories were turning out munitions day and night. Austrian, German, and Hungarian workmen in America were fashioning war implements, guns and bullets for the English and the French, and the Russians, deadly instruments which were to blow their brothers to pieces. The solidarity of labor was dead. Hilda now walked as if the ground under her feet belonged to someone else. She had grown timid. Several more months passed. People were taking sides violently. Her acquaintances took sides. For the French, for the Germans. Men denounced one another. Friendships were broken. Hilda kept aloof from this acrimonious partisanship. Both sides were trampling down her ideals. Both were doing the work of murder. Both sides had gone mad. She was alone a great deal now, and she was lonely. She had grown weary of people. They frightened her. Men, most of them, were sheep. They were led. They craved to be led. They could be stampeded into anything. And those that were not sheep were pigs, pigs in varying degrees. Some wallowed in big wages in munition factories. Others wallowed in big dividends in Wall Street. The one and the other were selfish, greedy, beastly, caring not for the wants and suffering of others, thinking only of their own interests, pleasures, gratifications. New York, kindly human New York, which had taken her under its protecting wing when she fled Chicago, fled the people who knew her, who might know her. New York, which she once loved fondly, tenderly, this New York was no longer the same. It had gorged itself to monstrous proportions on war profits. It was reeling drunk on blood money and was clamoring for more. More war, more ammunition, more profits. This New York was becoming daily more insufferable. It was weighing her mind down. If she could only escape it, for a time at least, if there was only a way out. "Mother!" Little Raymond had cried out in alarm one evening when he saw Hilda holding a spoonful of soup in her hand, staring at it with glassy eyes as if not knowing what to begin. Raymond was going to school now. He was big for his age. But Hilda picked him up in her arms and kissed and cuddled him as if he were still a baby. At 10 o'clock, as she was undressing, she was surprised to see the boy sit up in his bed. Raymond was wide awake. His eyes were shining. "You haven't been sleeping?" she inquired. "No, Mama, I couldn't." She bent down and felt his forehead. There was no fever. Her hand glided down to his shoulders, his back. "Go to sleep, child," she murmured, giving him a good-night kiss. "Mama," Raymond called softly. She was gazing at him indulgently. "Mama, can I sleep in your bed?" "Why, child, you aren't afraid, are you?" "No, but you are." Hilda gazed at her son, started to say something, but changed her mind. She extended her arms. The child leaped up and into them with a cry of delight. Hilda's correspondence with Hillstrom became more frequent. She wrote to him often and feverishly. Hillstrom's answers were just as frequent but calm. At times they were sardonic. He was writing from the far west. "Your great trouble in New York," he wrote in response to one of her letters, "is newspapers. You let them think for you, decide for you. My advice to you is, if you can't cease reading them, at any rate, cease believing them. Throw off the spell the newspapers have cast upon you. There was a time when men believed in soothsayers. Before that, they believed in oracles. Then they learned more and ceased to believe in the one or in the other. But the world moved on just the same. The editorial writers on most of your newspapers are no wiser and no truer than the oracles of old." "Don't worry about the fate of socialism," he wrote her on another occasion. "The obituaries in the capitalist papers won't even harm it, let alone kill it. Were the Kaiser to destroy every word Karl Marx ever wrote? Were the chauvinists of France to make a bonfire of every issue of L'Humanité which Jaurès inspired? It would avail them nothing. Truth, once spoken, is never silenced. A great idea never dies. And man, poor loathsome creature that he is at times, has in the main never gone back on a just cause. Don't let despair master you, he ended another of his missives. The people are right, even when their actions are wrong. They are what the past has made them. They will be what the future will make them. The masses are the inheritors of the earth, and with unselfish and proper guidance, they will yet make the earth free and beautiful. Be patient. And again, the war also serves. It is building the new order by destroying the old. It destroys institutions as ruthlessly as it destroys lives. It is undermining the capitalistic system most effectively, though the capitalists don't see it. War is a great destroyer of superstitions. Before we have done with it, the toilers of half the world will have shaken off many illusions about the superiority of their masters. Many of the rights, privileges, and traditions which our capitalist state of society has set up will be groveling in the dust. Reaction has always been the great accelerator of revolution. What you say is all true, too true, Hilda wrote back. But it isn't easy to maintain one's poise hereabouts. The profiteers and money changers are circling in a mad dance. The atmosphere in New York is suffocating. Of course it is, Hillstrom replied, but this is just as it should be. We are on the eve of a storm. A world storm is gathering, and the atmosphere always is heavy just before a storm. I'm taking to poetry, Hilda confided to him one Sunday evening soon after. I'm reading Walt Whitman. What a delight it is now that the herd instinct is lifting its head everywhere, now that men fear to stand alone and are seeking the company of like minds, or rather of like passions and prejudices. What a relief it is to come to Walt Whitman, to spend an hour with one who dared to stand alone, who shows the way to stand alone. I was reading this afternoon his Song of the Open Road. How I wish that I too might be afoot and light-hearted, and that I too might take to the open road. The open road's what I have been consciously and unconsciously dreaming of and pining for in recent months. The mad recent months. If there's nothing in New York to hold you, what prevents you from leaving it? Hillstrom's reply was brief. The open road is open to all. Why not take it? Why not come west? You'll find bread here, and people too. I shall write about it shortly. Why not? A second letter came from Hillstrom 3 days later, and in the same mail came another communication. It was from the secretary of the Miners' Union in Arizona. Hillstrom had spoken of her desire to come west, the letter said. He had recommended her to the miners' organization, and the organization was offering her a post. Hillstrom believed, and they quite agreed with him, that she would be very valuable to them. They knew of the work of the Shop Safety Committee in New York, knew of her share in it. They were soon to launch certain vital campaigns, and a quick answer would be appreciated. The salary was stated. It could be increased if she found it insufficient. Would she reply by wire? Hillstrom, in his letter, urged her to accept the offer of the Miners' Union at once. Thus far, he wrote, you've seen capitalism work with gloves, sometimes even with silk gloves. In the cities of the East, there's a public opinion which often compels the capitalist to keep within the limits of decency. There's no public opinion here. There's no middle class here. only miners and mine managers. The press, the pulpit, the few professionals are the retainers of the companies, of the big interests. Capitalism here rides roughshod. He described conditions to her. The miners were treated like serfs. The mine owners acted like feudal barons. Their henchmen even took the life of individuals whom they considered dangerous to their interests. Men were slain and the murderers never apprehended, though half the town knew who they were. The Union was now preparing to make a stand against these conditions. It was preparing to call a strike, to call more than one strike if necessary. That was the campaign the secretary of the miners' organization was writing her about. He, Hillstrom, had not recommended her for the job merely out of consideration for herself. He honestly believed she would be of great use to the miners in this struggle. Hilda read this letter twice. Then she turned to little Raymond. It was before supper. "Sonny," she said, "would you like to go away from here? Far away, 4 or 5 days by train?" "Would you, Mother?" "Why, I think 'twould be nice," she said. "It ought to be nice out there, and 'twould be nice to travel. Besides, if we didn't like it, we could always come back to New York." "Good." Little Raymond threw his arms about her neck. "When do we start?" "Very soon," she answered. They ate their supper in silence. When the meal was done, Raymond asked, "Have we anybody there, Mama? Any relations?" "No," Hilda said. "We have no relations there." Both were quiet. On a sunny afternoon early in the spring, Hilda left New York. It was Monday, people were working, and there was no one to accompany her and little Raymond to the railway station. When the train emerged from the underground stretch of road into the open, the city with its skyscraper heart and tenement flanks lay far to the rear. They were on the outskirts. It was roomier. Tenements were becoming scarcer and new, up-to-date apartment houses more frequent. The train was humming along. The engine whistled lustily like a young colt neighing in the pasture. The country was all about them now. What beautiful country! The fields were leaping forward and rolling back in green waves. The treetops bowed as if in greeting. A mellowness came over Hilda. She felt as if the fields, the brooks, the trees, all knew where she was going and were wishing her Godspeed. With the breeze, a soft whisper seemed to be wafted to her. It was the fields. They were speaking to her. They were telling her not to think of them unkindly in the new places she was going to harbor no grudges. It was not their fault that they had been so distant. People had put so many obstacles in their way. They had built a whole city between themselves and the meadows. But she must not harbor any ill feelings against the city and people either, the voice was pleading further. People were, after all, only people. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Where had she read it? Oh, yes, it was Jesus. So far back and still so modern, still so true. Yes, people were always people. Man was always making the earth a hell for his neighbor. She was lost in reflections. They had an hour's wait between trains in Chicago. Hilda located a telephone station and began looking through the directory for the Everts. She found the Evert Construction Company, the name of Henry Evert's concern. There was an Evert not Henry Everett, living on Independence Boulevard. Must be a son, she thought. What had become of the old man? There was no telephone in Raymond Everett's name. She looked him up in the classified directory under lawyers. There was no trace of him there either. It puzzled her. She had a firm belief that Raymond was a lawyer. She thought that he would be a figure in the community by this time. She looked once more, twice. There was no trace of Raymond anywhere. She went out into the street and took a stroll with the child for a few blocks. Her heart was beating fast. The city was so familiar. "Mother," little Raymond suddenly asked, "have I any uncles here? Johnny Stark says he's got an uncle in Chicago." Hilda gazed at him without answering. Raymond's mind was working very fast these days. The journey seemed to be stimulating it. He was asking questions continually. "No, you have no uncles here," she said finally. She turned back to the station, and they went in search of their train. Toward evening on the fourth day, the train dropped down into a valley, and Hilda discerned in the distance the outlines of a town at the foot of a mountain. It looked vague and shadowy at first, like a city painted on canvas, such as she had sometimes seen on the stage. Gradually, the place gained in clearness and stood out in definite outline. There were streets, public buildings, mills. Hillstrom was on the platform waiting for them. The campaign, of which the secretary of the miners' organization had written Hilda, had already begun, he informed her. The first of a series of strikes in the copper mines had been called at noon that day.